Move on to today's press review. Antonia Kerrigan joins us here in studio for that. And Antonia, we're going to start with the story of a group of migrants in the Chagos Islands. They've spent years stranded on one island, practically confined to a camp. Can you tell us more?
Yes, absolutely. The BBC and the New Humanitarian are covering this. This is, of course, a story that's extremely difficult to cover because it's an extremely remote island of the Indian Ocean. These two articles that I'd like to talk to you about what's in them. It's a group of 64 Sri Lankan Tamil migrants who were sailing to Canada when their boat ran into difficulties and they were brought to the island in 2021. Now, to give you an idea of the conditions they have been living in since, 8 of them have been relocated to Rwanda to receive medical care after self-harm or suicide attempts, and a UK court is currently deliberating on whether or not their stay on this island has been tantamount to unlawful detention. They say, as you see in these signs, that they say we need freedom. They say they've been kept like prisoners. When there was this court case this summer, where arguments were presented in which they said that they were mistreated by the private security company who ran the camp. They said that they would be punished for leaving the confines of the premises, which legally they were supposed to be allowed to do, and that they would be left standing in the burning sun as punishment. Now, the UK government has resisted granting asylum to them in the UK, fearing that this could create a backdoor migration route. The UK government also arguing that the Refugee Convention does not apply on this island due to its unusual status. Of course, these Sri Lankans were fleeing torture and persecution, so usually they would be allowed asylum. The update on this story that we've had in the last 24 hours is that 6 of them have now received offers of asylum in the UK, but they will first have to spend 6 months in a so-called safe centre in Romania before they come to the UK. The others await news. This as just last week, the UK government announced it will be handing over sovereignty of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, so the camp will, of course, be closing.
Indeed, let's hope an eye is kept on the situation there and what becomes of those people. Your next story, Antonia, is about a stolen child in Afghanistan.
Yes, this story began 5 years ago. Let's start with a 2022 article for context in the New York Times. How did this man think he had the right to adopt this baby is their title. The parents of this child were killed by US Army Rangers in a raid in this Afghan village in 2019. The 2-month-old baby was then taken to the Bagram Air Base, where the US Marine, Captain Joshua Mast, developed a plan to bring this child to the United States and adopt her. However, she wasn't without family, and under Afghan law, her relatives would have the first claim to taking care of her. A cousin and his new wife took her in and took care of her. Were her guardians in Afghanistan. This US Marine, however, then initiated separately in the US proceedings to become her legal guardian, even though she was still on Afghan soil. He then helped her 2 guardians and her to come to the US in 2021 when the Taliban returned to power, but he hadn't told them about these adoption proceedings. So when they arrived in the US, they were shocked and stunned to discover that he was now her legal guardian on US soil, and that she could be taken away from them after they'd spent 18 months caring for her. Now, the updates we've had more recently on this story: earlier this year, a US court voided the adoption, saying it was the result of a number of procedural errors. The details of just quite how Captain Mast pushed through that adoption through the courts remain fairly shrouded in secrecy. And the most recent update from earlier this morning is that this captain has avoided any disciplinary action by his employer, the US Marines, so he will not be discharged or disciplined. And in the meantime, pending a decision on what is to happen to this now 5-year-old, she remains in his care, and her 2 Afghan guardians are still fighting to get her back.
Gosh, that is one surprising story. Indeed, so many questions, Antonia. Finally, let's move back here to France, and the French police aren't paying their rent.
Yes, absolutely. Hundreds of thousands of euros worth of areas, mostly owned to the local authorities. So local authorities have been renting out premises to the gendarmes in towns across France. It's France Bleu has this story. One town they cite as missing £236,000 of rent this year. The reason is, of course, that this is an expensive year for the police, with mass deployment in New Caledonia, as well as the Olympics apparently being undercosted originally. And the cherry on the cake of this is that as the former Minister for the Interior, of course, of the former government that ended early September, who gave in his final days in office the green light to the police to not pay their rent due in September until December due to their financial struggles. Of course, this is difficult for the local authorities. It's a huge cash flow problem for them, and it's terrible for their confidence in the state as they brace for up to €6.5 billion nationwide of cuts in tomorrow's budget.
Another surprising story, Antonio. Finally, we're going to end with some better news from you. The star of a French live-action remake of Bambi has made veterinary history.
Absolutely. The star in question is Nina the deer, who we see on the poster for Bambi, the story of a life in the woods. France Info has this story. Now, after a bone tumour, the star, Nini the deer, was supposed to be put down until a vet decided, as you say, to make history. This is the first ever leg prosthesis on a wild animal. She's still walking shakily as she gets used to the prosthesis, but now she can enjoy her retirement from the bright lights of cinema.
Good. Thanks a lot, Antonio Kerrigan, with that look at the international papers.